And for those of you who don't know me, I am Amy Kuntz. I have with me Marilyn Goodrich, and we are instructional designers with teaching and learning with technology at Penn State, where half of our role is supporting shared programs. And so with that, we have the e-learning series, and this is session 3 of 5. And the first 2, although they are standard each year, the remainder are different, and we get ideas from faculty with topics of interest or something they want to share, or struggles that they have. So today it's bridging the gap, cross-campus teams, and peer review. And with that, often when we think of teamwork, when we think of group work, we think of group projects, but we're also talking about group work in the classroom. And so it's easier to do when all your students are right in the same room in front of you, but it's harder to do when you have students at various multiple campus locations. So kind of when is it appropriate to do group work? What are the challenges, advantages they are, and then how to do it. And so if you're not part of a shared program, we do kind of generalize it, but then we also talk about how to do it in that niche modality. From there, we're going to talk about peer review. And again, when is it appropriate? When is it beneficial? What are the challenges, advantages, and then how to do it? And so it's not just us talking about it. We do want to get your expertise and share your thoughts. And Marilyn and I are both practitioners, so I actually teach the equivalent of MIS 204 on a consistent basis. So we're not just instructional designers, we do teach as well. So we actually practice kind of what we preach. So when thinking about group work in the class, a lot of people think about cooperative learning, but there's actually 3 different varying degrees. So cooperative learning is maybe when you do think pair share activities and you share out. When you take it a step further and do collaborative learning, you might have a problem where they not just have it during that class for that 5 minutes, but they continually do it throughout the semester and really brainstorm answers, do group think, even maybe creating a book by the class where different people get a chapter and you create content. And then reciprocal peer teaching, this is where students help each other. So they might be in the same group for the whole duration of the semester, and they might help one another. So you could introduce a concept, but sometimes if it's newer to students, they could say in more layman's terms than us who have been doing it for a very long time. So that is another way to do it. And so why would you do this, especially with cross-campus, and have it be harder? Well, with shared programs, we really want to provide a seamless, consistent, and efficient student experience. And so having that engagement level. When students drive an hour into a campus location and then see a television screen, you want to make sure that it's engaging and they're not just sitting there. You want to have that engagement level throughout. And so now what we want to do is, if you're online, if you want to type in the text chat, kind of share your experiences with group work in class and what challenges and advantages have you experienced, as well as if you are at a campus location and you have someone else with there, talk to your peers. And what we will do is we're going to mute the microphone and then we'll come back in a few minutes. And then we'll come up with kind of share out from each area. So with that, I'm going to mute my mic. But if you have any issues, please let me know, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Can you hear us? If you could wave your hand just to make sure. Okay, wonderful. So does anybody want to share out and talk? If not, I could read what was in the text chat, and then for the campus locations, it'd be wonderful if we could hear what you want to share. Okay, so um, so online, what we do have, I want to make sure that everybody can hear us. It seems like we have a, okay, there we can. Just wanted to make sure before we continue on. So what I will do is I will reposition this and make sure that I speak a lot louder. So sorry about that. Gotcha. Okay, so hopefully this is a lot louder. So what we have online is that Veronica said, I usually have students work as a group on problems, mostly Excel, and she encourages groups to help each other. And one challenge with that is it can get noisy, but it's fabulous when one group helps another to understand what is going on. Some other challenges includes Kim, who said if one section finishes first, it could be distracting to the others. And then Karen said having everyone actively participate in the group. Sometimes one or two students dominate. And then another advantage is allows active learning and allows students to teach one another. So is there anyone else from one of the other campus locations that wants to share? If so, please unmute your mic. And if not, that's okay too. No. Okay. um, so with that, of course, there are advantages and disadvantages, and we are here to kind of share some of the ways that has worked well, especially with students at different locations. I think it's even more challenging. But even if you are new, and I know that it was mentioned that she's starting it here for one faculty member, is what works, what doesn't work, and sharing out some of those ideas. So when is it appropriate to do group work? I'm going to pass it along to Marilyn, unless you want me to. Okay, sorry. So with this, you want to have appropriate time. It does take time, especially just now, it was a few minutes in length. And so during the spring semester, we know we have snow days, and then you have to, if you have a few, you have to rush through stuff. And so that's most important. Another one is engaging student curiosity, tackling complex problems, and then two, sharing diverse perspective. There are a lot of classes now, more and more, that have adult learners and traditional age students, as well as some of those lower level that have different majors. And so in having those different perspectives, if you have the groups paired accordingly, it really helps get ideas from different things. So one course that I worked on was a making course last year. And with that, we made sure that each group had an architecture student, an engineering student, and an art student, because you could approach making very differently from those different. So what are the advantages to group work in class? You have an ownership of knowledge, accountability towards others. And with this, if you have groups throughout the semester and a student isn't prepared, what's really neat, if you see, is the peer pressure to say, hey, you didn't come prepared. And if it's just one class meeting, they don't get called out. But if it's that same group throughout the semester, their peers will say, hey, you didn't do the reading, you're not contributing. Get it together and make sure that you come prepared. So it's really neat to see that happen, especially if they know one another. So I know in some of the engineering courses I worked on, that really has happened. Communication and teamwork is a great skill, as well as problem solving. And again, when they explain something in their own layman's terms, it helps with the cognition of keeping it and doing better on the higher level exams. So what are the challenges to group work, especially fitting it in and then designing it so that everyone is an active contributor? As we said before, monitoring and assisting each group, varying attitudes about group work. So when you say, hey, students, work in groups, you might get something like this picture. So say, hey, now work with your group. Somebody's a little bit frustrated, somebody's going on their phone, another one could be napping. Again, there are some reasons why. Maybe a student isn't prepared, they're confused about the direction, so it compounds the issue and the problem. The teacher, they say, hey, why are we doing this? The teacher isn't teaching, we're paying for this class. And then they might not like the group members and all of these reasons that we had mentioned before. So now we'll do a second break of how would you overcome challenges. And if you haven't, have done this in the past, how you've overcome them. And for this time, we'll just ask for a volunteer. So has anybody encountered a challenge and how have you overcome them? With group work. Okay, Matt, here.
Sure, let me see if I'm guessing the camera is zooming. Yes, there I am. Well, one thing I try to do is I try to scaffold the group work. So in the initial part of the semester, the group work is much less, the point value is much less. They have more individual pieces to do than as a group, so that they get to know each other. They begin to experience that process until the more high stakes group assignments come in. So I try to keep the groups the same, but have more of a low stakes / scaffolding experience early, so they get to know how each other works, whether one does or doesn't work. I get to see the same thing, so I can be more prepared to step in a higher stakes assessment.
Good. Anyone else want to share?
I can share. Can you hear me?
Yes, and what is your name?
I'm Gwen Lin. I teach mathematics. And so for the group work, after they did the discussions, I always call out the kids who was not engaged in the group work first. So then at the beginning, they like who, and then they had to get an idea. Everyone have to talk and they have to contribute. At the beginning, I do have students say, I just don't care. I do not know what's going on. Then I just point out to the group mate, say, now your pal does not know what's going on. You're supposed to be the one teaching your pal what's going on. So I make the peer pressure of they have to talk, communicate with each other. I close monitor during the group work time and making sure everyone contribute. At the end, I do the regroup. And then I want not just call out one group of kids answer. Sometimes the answer is correct. I still call the next group. And also still call the next group. So to making sure I don't tell them the answer right away, I just call a couple of groups. And then do you agree? Why you disagree? And so it's making like everyone, no matter what, you have to contribute. Even Sometimes I purposely call out the group I knew they have wrong answer, such that the other group know the correct answer would able to jump in and contribute. So that, but it take energy to make kids all on board with you. That is the hard part. So you have to build it up at the very, very beginning. And if you make the sloppy kids get away with being sloppy from the beginning, the whole group wouldn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I'm going to touch base upon it. Is with having a group, you typically have a volunteer say who's going to be the group spokesperson. So saying, hey, we're going to call on a group, but we're going to pick who that person is, and it's up to you to make sure that all your peers know. So not just you, but you're held responsible for your peers, and that anybody can explain that. So that's one great perspective. So one thing that I like to just touch upon briefly is the community of inquiry. Has anybody heard of this? If so, kind of raise your hand really high. No. So this is a lot with online teaching. It's more so an emphasis to include, but learning is a social process. It's not just you reading the textbook and learning on your own. And these slides will be available. I'll send them out. So teaching and the educational experience in the middle, of course, you have teaching and facilitation. Then you have cognitive presence and focusing on the content, but then you have the effective emotional expressions and having that social learning of talking to one another as well. So to have that robust educational experience, it's inclusive for all of that. So if you're interested in learning more, there is a website at the bottom that has lots of research around this topic. So how to overcome challenges of group work in class with real examples is set the stage. I know that sometimes with flipping the classroom or creating a hybrid or online course, you might have a statement in the syllabus. So same thing with this. If you say, hey, for this course, we are going to have consistent group work where you're responsible and your teams, and you are going to be helping one another. So just for that example, saying it's up to you, not just for your own learnings, but to make sure all your peers in your group know the information. And then throughout the semester, have it be a talking point, maybe after the exam, the ones who help each other out and make sure everyone knows how did they do in comparison to everyone else, and have it be that talking point throughout the semester. Again, sometimes with students, you have to give them the carrot to do work. So having pre-class activities to make sure that everyone is prepared is not just that peer pressure. Another thing with group work is just making sure that you do have the question or the directions visible and clear, so you don't have to explain them over and over. You just say, hey, look up here. And then to report out planning. So not just going through each group or picking out something. What I liked, and if you were at session 1, is the randomization. So if you take, I know it's kind of childish, but popsicle sticks and assign each group a number and say, hey, we'll pick group number 5. And then in group 5, you're given numbers, and it's going to be student number 4. And so if you call in a group at the beginning of class not using that method, they'll say, hey, we answered the question for the day, now we're off the hook the rest of the class. But having that randomization makes sure that they're always on point and they're always knowing that they could be called at any time. And then 2, if you're having consistent groups throughout the semester, maybe having peer evaluation, saying, hey, was your group member contributing today, or these past 4 weeks, how did they contribute? And that could be part of their grade. So reciprocal peer teaching and gamification. So has anybody seen at carnivals like the racetrack game where you squirt the button and then they go faster or slower? So some instructors, I know one in mathematics, has them in groups, and then if you get called on and you get it right, you move one thing up ahead. And then if you get it wrong, you might get back. And so adding that little bit of gamification, it doesn't need to be anything spectacular technology, but just having little magnets and moving it throughout semester and saying, hey, whoever's the winner at the end gets 5 bonus points as that level of competition that they really, really like. And so here, what was mentioned earlier is everyone must know the answer by the end of the time and randomly call on the group and randomly get that spokesperson. So it was really neat that you said about that earlier. So another thing is to take turns and assign a job as a questioner or reporter. So this was done in RHS. And so with video conferencing, it could be hard with muting and unmuting. And so this worked well when the instructor was in front of a lot of students and there was one campus location that only had 5. So with that, the campus that only had 5 typically had one person who kept being their spokesperson. And so saying, hey, we're gonna rotate it. So each class is not just that one student, you're off the hook for today, but it's gonna be someone else. So then that person at the other location is responsible for reading the problem and then holding the dialogue and then prompting them with questions and then ending the conversation and then being the person to summarize in a report. So having that role and responsibility is another approach that has worked well in shared programs. Some additional examples are to have some guides. So Math 21 and 22 were not shared, but having some worksheets saying, hey, this is what we're gonna work on, and having them have it be ahead of time. Another one is peer teaching, not during the class time, but for group work. So instead of you presenting on a specific topic for the week, you'll rotate and have one of the student groups either do a research paper and present on that or talk about a specific topic. So that has worked well in our shared biology program. Chemistry is group answering and group tests. So if you say, hey, one part of the exam is group work where you can collaborate. And so having that dynamic and saying, hey, make sure that you study and get everything, where you might choose answer C, but then after talking to someone else, you might reevaluate that. And then accounting is stepped answering. So one is saying, hey, for each person in the group is responsible for one part of the counting question and then handing it off down the line. So that's another example. So now we want to take an opportunity to switch and think about group projects where students are working on a project outside of class. So what are your experiences with group projects, and then what challenges and advantages have you experienced? So for this, I know that some of you might are only by yourself. So because of that, if it's okay, we'll just ask for volunteers this time because we don't want you just sitting there. So with that, is there anybody who wants to talk about their experiences? And if you are online by yourself via Zoom, if you'd rather be comfortable typing in the text chat, I will say what is typed in there. I'll give everyone a minute. Nobody wants to share?
I can share.
Okay, yes, that'd be great. Thank you.
The challenge is the most challenge I have is student complain their group mate they don't contribute, right? And so I always got complaint from particular students say I was the only one doing all the work because the project is always outside class, because this is always more deeper question and bigger stuff. They need to do multiple steps in order to achieve the project. And then till now it's always the 1-2 kids in the same group are working on it, and other one were just not working on it. Yeah.
That's very, very common. Is there anybody else who wants to say anything? So Kim said online, I think you always have unequal work being done by group members. That's why peer evals are so important. So we'll talk about the challenges in a second, but as far as when it is appropriate to do group work, when students are in the same discipline and relatively know each other is always a bonus. If you have it be towards the end of the semester as a large capstone or a large assessment, and then 2 is using it to be aligned with maybe your program assessment. So I'm going to pick on corporate comm, and they say, hey, we want our students to be great presenters of information. And so it's not just a presentation just of yourself, but with your team members. And so when you introduce it to your class, you have it as a selling point, as we are preparing you. It's an outcome of all corporate comm students to have the skill of presenting together. For shared programs, it's good to have a cohesive learning experience. And too often when you do group projects, you say, hey, we'll just divvy up who's here in groups and then who is at Mont Alto and to 1 or 2 groups. But think outside the box, and you could actually do cross-campus teams, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So the advantages, of course, are reinforced skills both for group work and individual work. You could tackle more complex problems, that information exchange, and diverse knowledge of background and perspectives. So even though we have traditional age students, many of them are out in the working world, and so some within their major already. And so going back to RHS in the Northeast, there are some who are working at mental health facilities, some who are working in volunteer work, and so they could actually bring practical experience into class and group projects. So the challenges, our students don't like it, and this is a funny meme that goes, that's out on the internet. So we have one person who does 99% of the work. One person has no idea what's going on the whole time. Another says he's going to help, but he's not. And then another person disappears at the beginning and doesn't show up at the very end. So this might happen, or 1 or 2, but some challenges are that team dynamics, unequal distribution of work, scheduling conflicts, and then although peer review is great and holds people accountable, is saying, hey, that peer pressure of everybody give, everybody an A. So that's hard if you know everybody and you have to take that into consideration. So how do you go around that? We're going to skip this because we talked about it a little bit. Is challenge the teamwork perception. So one thing that has worked well is, and I know this is thinking long term, is getting snippets from students after the class is over. And then having that either be text-based and projected on the screen, or having it be videos of them, and students hearing from other students of, hey, I didn't like it at the time, but now I found it valuable, has helped anecdotally in some of the programs. Another one is project design. So doing it in phases and having checkpoints along the way. And so not just having the group presentation at the very end and maybe they have to submit the PowerPoint the night before, but saying, hey, where's your rough draft of the presentation? Okay, now that you're going to be putting it into the PowerPoint, what does it look like, etc. Another thing is a lot of times faculty say, okay, time to do a project, but they don't address teamwork, or they assume that it was covered in other classes. So having students learn about teamwork is sometimes something to incorporate. I know IST 110, I don't know if they still have it, but they have a teamwork module, or they used to. And so that we actually have used in other courses like EDSGN 100. And so having students learn about teamwork and maybe take a quiz or hold discussions around that during class time is okay, and it has helped as well. Another thing is team contract and assigning roles and responsibilities. So as part of a team contract, and we'll give you an example online, is saying, okay, when are we going to meet? Let's pick a time and have that there, or what contact information are we going to share? And then have all those emails and everything be done accordingly. And then lastly, like how frequently you're going to meet, who's going to be doing what. So having that contract and then holding them accountable as part of the overarching project, that's another thing that has helped. And then going back to the phases are those interim reports and check-ins throughout the process. One thing that you could also do is peer assessment, and then do a peer assessment of the peer assessment. So this I got from 2012 from a faculty member, and I don't know their name, at Fayette, when we did a colloquy on hybrid learning as all the instructional designers at the campuses. And so they said, hey, to remove that peer pressure of just giving everybody an A, he graded how well you gave a peer review. So you had to justify your response. You had to give examples of what they did well and what they didn't do well. So you had to quantify your grade that you gave your peers, and then you were actually evaluated on that. So I thought that was something different and very interesting. And so that we did a business course, and it helped distribute the grades. So they did a better job with peer review, not just giving everybody A's, that they actually gave B's or C's according. And then lastly, project guidelines and grading. So being very clear, having those rubrics, those are generalized. And as part of this too, it's up to you how much you want to monitor. So there are ways to say, hey, although it's group work, I'm going to be in your group space, and I want to see that everybody's contributing. And so you could actually track kind of who's doing what, like Big Brother. So we're going to go over quickly what some of the technologies are in a little bit. So some other, going back to that teamwork perception with quotes and videos, some other things that have done well is survey results from students and seeing what they liked, what they didn't like, and challenging them to give 3 pros about the teamwork and 3 cons, and saying you have to do both. So what worked well, and then you could amplify that, and then what didn't work well, and then you could fix those particular aspects instead of just saying, hey, I hate group work. Well, why did you hate the group work? Another thing, and this I haven't done, but is survey students before putting into teams. So survey their perception of teamwork, what they don't like, what they like, what they don't like. And then here, they actually had some students saying, hey, I hate group work because I'm the one who pulls everything together. And so the faculty member actually put all those people who were the last minute, I'll do everything, and put them in a team. And then the people who weren't as good about that in another one. And so then they surveyed after the project, and the ones who hated group work and were those ones who did all the work before said, you know what, I actually liked this group project. So I know some people will say, oh, well then you might get a poor group versus a good group. So it's really up to you and what your preference is. So with that, I am going to talk about hows for the group work, and I'm not going to repeat many of what we have already said, but go over some highlights. So before group work in class, I said do some peer evaluations. I know it's K through 12 and kind of quirky, but on the right-hand side, it's just a little printout. And each week you could say, how did your team members do this week? And for each one, they get a line, and you give them a grade of 1 through 5. And then that overall could be their grade at the end of the semester. Setting guidelines for discussions and group work overall for the class, and then explain why. So why are you doing this? Why are you having group work during class? And then going back to that accountability. And then checklists for managing group work during class is actively engage and monitor. So with that, how to do it in video conferencing classes is a little bit hard, but in the next slide I'll talk about that. And then frequently provide feedback both to individuals and groups. And then after the group work, debrief, give feedback, and you could say, hey, we had group work, everybody seemed to contribute, but was it helpful? So then before they leave, you could assess the student learning with a quiz or a minute paper or something like that. So video conferencing classes. So you might be in a classroom where you see the presentation and you have an instructor on a video camera. How do you do this? So make sure that you practice. I know for here, at Brandywine, we have the gracious push to talk buttons, which zoom in, which is really neat. But make sure that students know how to mute or unmute accordingly. And then another interesting thing is a back channel to remote students. So saying, hey, we are going to take 5 minutes now and talk, but I'm going to be available through Canvas chat. And if you have any questions, you could talk that way. So that way they have it on their phones and can communicate that way when the group work is being broken out. And then you want to make sure that everything, the directions are understood by everybody before you break into those groups. So desktop video conferencing, if you were at the last session, we use those breakout rooms. I know that people really like that. So two, when you do breakout groups, you want to establish the process. And then just like breaking out into groups in one place, breakout rooms, you could actually pop around. And then you do want to bring it all back together and go over what you learned by visiting each group. So switching from in-class group work to group projects, you want to really think about 4 key things. The time during the class, maybe giving them some time to meet, having that individual accountability, teach some teamwork skills, and create that interdependence. So saying, hey, it's not just doing a presentation, but showing your contributions to the presentation overall, and having them maybe document certain things or doing that peer evaluation. So now with the technology, has anybody used groups in Canvas? Okay, we see 2 people. Great. So in Canvas, you could actually create group spaces for students to work together in those small groups, and that is what is shown here. And then there's a link at the bottom of the slide with the Canvas learning path about how to set it up, but Marilyn and I are happy to meet with you and do that. One advantage of Canvas over Angel is there is a thing called a group assignment. So in Angel, if you had an assignment, a student would have to submit it, and then you never know if the group members, if your group member submitted, etc. But you could say, hey, for this particular assignment, we're going to have everybody in groups and just have one person submit. And then it's linked to all those other team members, which is really nice. Some other tools to use to do group work include Box and Yammer. And then to meet up in real time includes Zoom and Canvas conferences. So as far as group projects, there are many different examples, which I had talked about earlier. But I'll give you one snippet is back to that RHS professor. He said, you know what, I have 30 students at Hazleton, and I only have 6 at Wilkes-Barre. And so he was talking about mental health and the stigma of people not hiring those with a disability in those areas, maybe schizophrenia. And so they had to go out and interview people, whether it's their family members or somebody that they worked for, and say, would you hire somebody? Why or why not? And challenge that stigma. And so instead of having groups at Hazelton and groups at Wilkes-Barre. For every group, they had 2 students at Wilkes-Barre and then 4 students at Hazelton. And you might be saying, well, how do they do the presentation during class? Yes, you could do interviews and you could synthesize, but they actually used, it's called the Beam robot. And so you could actually control on the computer the robot moving around the classroom. And so we were able to have 4 of the students stand up here, have the robot with the other 2 students right next to it, and they were able to present to everybody. And out relative. So now I'm going to switch things over and give it to Marilyn to talk about peer review. So give us 1 second to switch off the microphone so you don't hear a lot of feedback.
Are you, excuse me, are you able to hear me okay? Okay, I got some head nods. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. This is I'm Marilyn Goodrich, and I really do appreciate Amy showing us a lot of information about group work. I think it is so important that we are able to understand the advantages and sometimes the disadvantages and the groans that you might get whenever you tell them that you're going to be doing something within a group. I've been there. But now I also wanted to add more, especially with peer review, because it is so important that we are preparing our students and the adults have to really increase their skills, their higher level thinking by looking at peer reviews. So we're really going to take a look at, when we're going to do peer reviews and what are some advantages and what are some challenges that we might have with peer review. So before we actually move into that, I want you to think about your experiences with peer reviews. What challenges have you faced if you've been using it within your classroom? And then also too, what advantages have you experienced? Do you remember doing anything like this previously? Or is this something maybe new that you're thinking of trying? So you can add that. I'll let you, excuse me, think about that for a minute or two. And then you can share in the chat or you can share out. Nobody wants to share, which is okay. I completely understand that. But there are some challenges, some advantages. Talk a little bit about that because it is important to understand when you actually do the peer review. We want to make sure that we're using it for a specific purpose. We just don't want to continue to add because there is a lot of time that it does take to actually lay out the peer review and get started. So when it's appropriate is when we need to have an increase in feedback. It might be a writing class, we might be doing a specific project. We want to make sure that the students really need just not to get feedback from us, but also from their peers. And also too, we want the students to be able to master concepts and also learn from each other, which is really important because their thinking or thought process might be a little bit different than what their peer or what was in a specific group with them might be. So we want them to be able to see different viewpoints and different ideas. And then again, make sure that you're providing a specific purpose for it so that they know the reasoning behind it. It's not that you want to get out of grading the students' work because that's not the purpose of that peer review. So the advantages really is to allow the students to learn from each other at their own level. So pairing them with someone, whether it be chosen by you or whether it be chosen by the student, they're going to learn more by sitting and being able to either talk face to face with them or else getting and having their comments down on paper, which again, there's different ways to actually do the peer review, getting it on paper first and then meeting face to face with their peer reviewer. We also want to show that really advantages are that it's going to strengthen their student, the actual work of the student. So it's going to make them think a little bit stronger. If I know a peer reading my paper, or if I know a peer might be looking at my steps within a specific project, they might do a little bit more work so that they actually have something to show their peer and might not be embarrassed. And also too, the advantage is you really want them to get more comfortable giving and receiving feedback, because the constructive feedback they're going to be getting not just within your course, but other courses, but they're also going to be getting that out in the workforce. And they want to, and you want them to be able to get feedback and be able to handle, whether it be that constructive feedback with their writing or any kind of feedback within their skills that they have for their job. And then also too, the assessment support. We do actually assess things throughout our day and throughout our work, depending on what we're doing, but it's going to be able to support those assessment skills for students, which is really important because we want them to be able to think and process and understand a lot more, and also use those higher level thinking skills. And we want them to be able to think differently, not one-sided. But there are some challenges. As with group work, there are some challenges. And one of them is that the students may already have had some negative experiences with peer reviews. Maybe someone did not provide them with a very nice peer-reviewed piece, and that can really get students very upset, very bothered by the fact that maybe someone didn't even take enough time to provide them with a peer review that was of quality. The feedback might not be meaningful. I've had experiences with my doctoral program, which the feedback was, "This was nice," or "I like how you wrote this sentence out," and that was it. It didn't give me the information that I really wanted about the concept and was I on the right track. Also, people is that they might not feel comfortable providing that feedback to another peer, especially one that they do not know, one that they don't feel comfortable with. And we hesitate too sometimes as adults wanting to give feedback to our peers because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But we'll talk about how you can kind of get around that. We also have students that might not take the assignment very seriously. Some of the answers to some peer reviews that I've been hearing was, "It was good," "I liked it," those kinds of things, which are responses that you'd get in a K-12 environment. We want them really to give meaningful and serious types of responses. And we want to make sure too that although it is sometimes time consuming, by having guidelines and having a process to do it, that it's going to narrow down the time and they can really focus on what they want to add to that peer review piece. So it's your turn. Think about some of the challenges that you might have had and what I just mentioned too. How would you overcome some of the challenges that we just talked about, especially those of you that might be thinking about doing peer reviews in your classroom? So you can add it in the chat or you can volunteer. Okay, no one? Okay, that's okay. We completely understand.
And instead of switching, I'm going to just talk.
Oh.
So go to the next slide.
Okay.
I can.
If you type up the.
Let's go with the buttons. All right. I guess one thing I was wondering, I mean, maybe modeling like what good peer review looks like, maybe either live in class, right? Or maybe even providing some prior reviews from student work so they have this, know what the expectations are to allow them to get that opportunity before they go out and do it, so they have some confidence.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share some examples that we have encountered, and they're listed on the slides, and I just have one slide before going back to Maryland, which is why I'm talking from here. So English, a lot with papers, and so giving examples of the good feedback and how to evaluate is key. And so with English, when they have done this, it has worked well. One that I didn't list, which is actually interesting, is CAS 100, and doing some, this is at a prior campus location. And so they said, hey, let's actually do that live meetup and talk about it. And not just during class time and breaking out and having that mass chaos. Instead, they said, hey, instead of meeting this week, we are going to have 10-minute chunks of time where you meet real time with the instructor, and then you do the peer review with the instructor present. And so for that week, for Tuesday, Thursday, it was just the group members came together with the pairs to peer about each other's work, and the instructor said, hey, you missed this or this missed that, and it gave that guidance. And so when they did it the second time, they didn't meet up and do it in real time, but they had better peer evals than if they just did, hey, we're going to do it online at your own time. So having that guidance was really beneficial. Marketing 310, we're actually going to show you an example in a little bit, since we do have some more time, since we aren't talking as much, and we'll have some some explanations from the faculty member who couldn't come in today. She had a conflict. But another one was psychology. And so with that, again, modeling, showing them examples of how to do review or critical analysis, having a checklist. So yes, the final paper, you might have a rubric, but what does that look like for a checklist for peer review? And turning that rubric into a checklist of what to look for, and just having that saying, hey, did you look for this? Did you look for that? Really helped improve the peer review that was going on. And then just like the grading of peers for a group project, doing a peer review of the peer review. So again, going back to psychology with that checklist, saying, hey, you only did 8 out of the 10 things that you're supposed to look for. You missed 2 of them. So you know what? That counts as part of a snippet of the grade for that project. So that's another good one that has actually worked within Penn State.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. And it always is nice to hear that things are being done, that this is being done, and it's being done successful. And again, it's through trial and error. So if it doesn't work that first time, don't give up. Again, it might not have been structured. So we're going to start moving through with how to create a peer review framework and actually how to get started. So we first want to make sure that you're providing enough time to actually do it. Do you have it? I know that there's a lot of information that you need to put in to those weeks in that semester. And then you also have to figure out, where is it actually going to take place? Do you want the peer review to take place outside of the classroom, outside of the instruction, or actually in the classroom? And then how many peers are the students going to give feedback to? Is it just one? Is it within that small group if you have a group together? So you have to figure that, the logistics pieces out also. And then you want to provide guidelines, meaning, do you have a checklist like Amy mentioned a few seconds ago? Do you have a series of questions that they need to ask, a very structured series of questions? Do you also have a rubric that goes along with the peer review that they're going to be looking at? We're not looking at the rubric for the project or the paper. We're looking at a rubric or guidelines specifically for that peer review process. And most importantly, too, is you want to show examples and non-examples. You want to show them what a quality peer review looks like compared to one of those, what's a good word for it? Non-examples, the not great quality examples, which I think every instructor has had possibly at some time. One of those non-examples of some student feedback. So making sure that they understand this is what a quality piece looks like. This is what's going to provide us with more meaningful work. And also too, you have to figure out, is it going to be anonymous, or just do you want the student, the other student, to know who actually is providing that? Sometimes that anonymity actually does help, because then no one knows and they aren't prejudging that person, especially if it's a smaller classroom and they've been within that cohort or that program. Again, you never know. So sometimes the anonymous piece is wonderful until they can then get together face to face at the very end. There is also something called a back evaluation. So it's kind of like giving feedback on the feedback, And this is something through my doctoral program that we do. We didn't do it for every single peer review. The faculty specifically picked one or two times when we did peer review, and we then had to go back and look at the feedback, our peer review or peer evaluation that was given to us, and then we had to provide evaluation back to them. Did they do a nice job? How can you fix, or how can you adjust based on the comments or the meaningful pieces that they particularly gave you? So the back evaluation actually did work because it brought it kind of full circle around, and it allowed us as scholars to really understand that, you know, what we wrote really didn't work the way we thought it was going to work. Because once you've read something or you've watched something for hours on end or days on end, it all looks good. So by getting that feedback from somebody else, I was able to go back using that back evaluation and make some adjustments and changes. You also had to think about, are they going to be able to revise and resubmit the assignment after the feedback? So are we getting a grade based on what they have provided? So if I've gone in and I've given a peer review to my partner, do I then just turn that in and then that particular paper is going to be graded? Do I wait for the peer review to the very end, or do I actually wait and allow them to go back and do some assessment and resubmissions? So I've seen it both ways, but it's highly recommended that you allow them to make those changes, because that's the whole purpose, is that whole learning process. So we don't want to skip that. And then also to take a look at the timeline, make sure they know those timelines, and make sure that they can check in, so that throughout the semester they know exactly when those peer reviews are due. And then also to, are those peer reviews going to be graded? Because again, your students might ask, is this going to be graded? You know, how many points is this going to be? And we're rating those peer reviews based on the quality. That's why within those guidelines, you have a rubric, you have a checklist, you have specifically set criteria, so that you can go and take a look and make sure that the student has really assessed their peer and given them some quality information. Okay. And then also too is those roles and responsibilities of students. We have to remember that students are the readers. They're not going to be the evaluator of the entire piece, the project, or the paper, and they're not the graders. So it's not an easy way to get a grade from a student's piece of work. That's not the point. The point really is to focus on building the student's skills. So we really want to make sure that the students follow the guidelines that are set. The students are going to play two roles. They're going to be the reviewer and then the recipient of a review. So they have to understand that they need to put as much effort into that own review as someone hopefully is giving to them. And then we want to make sure that the students are keeping their opinions out of the review process. Because sometimes, especially if it is paper that has an opinion or it's an argument, you might have a peer reviewer that wants to place their opinion. They might not like the topic. They might not like the way something was actually said. So we will make sure that the roles and responsibilities of the students and the reviewer are set. Okay, and I'm going to hand it back to Amy, and I'm going to turn off the mic for a minute.
Kid kind of like wave your hand. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So before I go over one example of that Marketing 310, although peer review is not required, if you have a lot for a Management 301 course up at Hazleton, it's a 301W, so it's the magical W for extra writing, but they require that a lot of times when students do a draft, they say, oh, it's not really counted for a grade. I'm going to only half-assed do it. But she actually is requiring them to go to their local writing center and do that as part of the process. So having that accountability that the draft is important, maybe going to a writing center, incorporating that as part of the assignment to hold them accountable and to have that draft be really well crafted to better get feedback later on. is another key example. So as far as stepped approach to peer review in practice, is Terry Clementi, who is at Penn State Wilkes-Barre. She was unable to join us today, but she did want to provide some commentary and share her experience. And so I'm allowed to do that with her permission. So she has an online marketing course. So that's an extra challenge of how to do peer review online. And so before, to do a press release, so we see press releases in the news, like a statement from a company. So for corporate communications, they have to do press releases all the time. So for here, on her first iteration, she gave the lesson, she had them read examples in the textbook, she gave some written commentary, and had a video on the content. And she had her students write a draft of a press release and then exchange it with a partner. And then after that, they got that feedback and they corrected the draft and submitted the final version. But as Kim said online, people are too generous with their peer evaluation. And so they weren't critical and didn't provide it. So that way the end result was weaker feedback that led to weaker press releases. And so this year, what she is doing is we added additional verbal explanations. And so we have Terry go over both examples and non-examples of press releases and say, these are this is the checklist for the peer review. This is what I'm looking for. And she goes through, and I'll show that to you in a second. And then as a stepped part, before students do the peer review, they're put into groups where they get 5 kind of mediocre examples of press releases, and they each have to take one and do a review of that fictitious example. And so with that, then they have a discussion of like, hey, you missed your teammate as Jane Doe, you missed this in your review. So that's step 2. And then the third is doing that peer review. And so that second one is really nice because yes, there's online discussions, but it is prepping to have your closer peer reviewer and get to know. So it's reinforcement of the key elements and chance to get to know the students in that group setting. And in addition, for these kind of activities, we use voice threads. So it's not just typed responses. Students actually have to use their video. So you get that look and feel and that audio commentary, which is really nice. So give me 1 second. With the previous class, I forgot to open up Canvas. So bear with me. And we will be ending a little bit earlier, so that way if you do have a class after this, don't worry. And while I'm doing this, has anyone done peer review in their courses? I know that we haven't talked more so about group projects, but I don't know if Kim, you had mentioned that you have done peer review, but has there been anyone else to do peer review? It's a very shy group today. It's okay. And so with this, it is later on in the semester, so we don't have any feedback yet of if students liked it or not, but we are going to incorporate that. And so with press releases, students get reading assignments, and they are, as part of this, they go and learn how to write a press release, and they have videos for that. They also have examples that are online. And then here they have a video that goes through each part. And again, it's that checklist of what to look for. So that was what was done previously. And then what we added is Terry's example of a good and bad press release. So this, again, uses a technology called VoiceThread. And I'm going to play her commentary of what to look for. So hopefully it will come through the computer.
This month, and where? A New Jersey firm conducting research. The format is credible and professional. It's labeled as a press release. The release date statement is 6/21/2011. The contact information is for Tom Jones with his name, phone number, and email. The headline is bold and centered.
So we won't go through the whole thing because we don't have to learn how to do press releases. But as you can see, it's going through the checklist that the peer review is going to contain. So she's giving exactly what to look for and where. So having that stepped approach, we think will really help the students in the long term. So is there any questions about that? No? Got some head shaking now. So some things to consider when you're doing a peer review. If you have an online course, it's one thing, but if you have a video conferencing course, are you going to be doing it during class, outside of class, or maybe that other example that you're going to cancel class and then meet in small groups of each peer review kind of team? Is it going to be cross-campus or not? Probably, although ideally we would want it to be cross-campus, maybe that first time that you're doing it, to have it be more familiar, maybe break out into groups at each campus because that's better than nothing. And then how will you check in with your students to make sure that they're doing it correctly? And then what is the class community dynamic? Do they know one another? Do they talk? Are they very shy? How do you facilitate that? And what's your plan? So those are all key things to think about. During video conferencing classes is that, again, that muting and unmuting, making sure that students are capable and know how to do that, because audio and audio feedback is probably the most common issue. And then another one is a back channel. So how, if you're going to break everybody into teams, how are you going to be able to talk at a distance with all the chattering going around? And then again, that example I said about as far as meeting up and that smaller groups, there's a tool within Canvas called Canvas Scheduler. Has anyone heard of this? If you could raise your hand. Marilyn. This is actually a lesser known feature, but if anybody has used Doodle, Veronica, I think you used like Sign Me Up or Meet With Me or something like that is another free tool online. But Canvas actually has their own. And so you could say, hey, on Friday, I did this during the summer, but on Friday, July 14th, instead of having class, I want to meet with students, and this one was 20-minute increments. And so it divides up that time, and then students sign up and reserve that time. So you could say, hey, what team is going to sign up during a specific one, and you can meet and observe that peer review aspect. And then another one is consider cross-campus, maybe towards the end of the class, for students to break up and meet synchronously through that cross-campus. In the earlier slide, this was done for RHS 401. They said, hey, the last 20 minutes of class, go to the library and meet up through the little learning pods that have the TV screens and connect through the laptop and meet with your peers then. So again, it's nice because it's that cross-campus team. There was a space for it, and there was time built into class for that. Some of the technologies, again, Canvas actually has a peer review assignment aspect. I have not experienced this, so I can't give too much insight, but the learning path does go through this. Talking with other faculty who have used this tool, make sure that students submit their draft. So one person who has done this, and she said, you're going to get a grade for your peer review. Some of the students didn't have something to review because their peer didn't submit their draft. And so that's an important aspect to consider when you're doing this. Another technology is Turnitin. As part of Turnitin with Penn State, there is an aspect called peer mark. And so you could do peer review and Turnitin. So if you're thinking about plagiarism, that's another alternative tool, and we're happy to meet with you if you're interested in that. And with that, that's kind of it. So is there any questions or comments, concerns? And we're happy to work one-on-one. I know each individual has unique challenges. So if you want to learn more, Marilyn and I are happy to meet up and to go over that. So same thing with Terry. She had a particular need and a challenge, and she said, hey, how do I do this better? So we met up and worked with her, and we had a mid-semester survey that went out this week, and so far, overall for her class, it's going really well, and they're having more engaging conversations. So it's not just peer review, we're here to help for other aspects as well. Okay, so Paul said we now have chat working at Mont Alto, was looking for Canvas chat. Oh, well, you were more than happy, like I said, to unmute and talk. So if you have any questions or any comments, please unmute and talk. We're more than happy, and we really like hearing your perspectives. So again, if you're not in it already, we are going to be adding you to a Canvas Pride, in which we have all the resources, including the link to today's recording will be up there later on today or tomorrow. And Marilyn and I are both in there, but at any time, feel free to reach out to us via email or call us at the numbers provided. So thank you so much, and have a great day.